Okay, good evening. Thank you all for coming, and we are having a little technical difficulty, but the camera person back there assures me that this microphone is working for him picking up the sound, but it's probably not helping you very much. The sound coming out of the speaker keeps going off and on, so hopefully it's not too obnoxious. But thank you very, very much for coming out here this evening. My name is Larry Fuel, and I recognize quite a few faces, Director of the Global Affairs Center. Before we begin, I do want to mention, that this program is being, tonight's event is being recorded, and that is why we're using the speaker. So when we come to the question and answer part, if you have questions, if you'd raise your hand and somebody will run around and bring you a microphone, just because it helps us to provide a clear recording later on. And please turn off or silence your cell phones if you're carrying those. I have a bunch of statistics, but I realize I'm not going to repeat them because on your chairs there are background full of statistics. You'll be getting some more statistics by the presenters, so I'm going to gloss over all that stuff, except to say that the United States shares a big border with Mexico. Mexico is an extremely important partner economically, culturally, socially, everything like that. And one thing I will mention, though, that is in the background as well, but I was kind of found sort of interesting. During a 5-year period, 2009 to 2014, if I recall, more Mexicans left the United States to go back to Mexico than left Mexico to migrate to the United States. So that's sort of counterintuitive from the version we're hearing. Here in the United States, we just finished a rather bruising presidential election, including some heated words about immigration and trade for Mexico. What's that all about? How do the citizens of Mexico, what do they think about all this? Do they still like us? So here to speak truth to power, as they say, or at least to give us his perspective on the state of the relationship between the United States and Mexico, and really Mexico and the world, is Dr. Roberto Dondisch, the Consul General for Mexico here in Seattle. We're very, very pleased to have him. He knows the U.S.-Mexico relations very well. He's been here in Seattle since July of this past year, but he's done a lot of other things before that add to the depth of his wealth of knowledge that he'll share with us tonight. He was Director General for Global Issues within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs most recently. He was a chief negotiator for Mexico for the post-2015 development agenda and the Paris Climate Accords. Chief negotiator for arms trade treaties. He was a special advisor for international security to the government of Mexico. He was a coordinator of Mexican participation as an elected member of the United Nations Security Council, when Mexico was elected member, that is. Dr. Dondisch was educated both in Mexico and in the United States. He has a PhD in international relations from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Baltimore, Maryland. His bachelor degree on international relations from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico City. So he's got a wealth of credentials, and he'll share some of his information with us, some of his background with us.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for Shoreline Community College for doing this. It's a pleasure being here. As I was introduced, I've been here only for, almost 9 months now. Of course, when I got here, that's the way every day looked like. And after a month, they told me, "Are you happy there? Do you want to stay there?" I said, "Yes." Right? No, it's been amazing. I love this. It's been a great experience. I lived for 8 years in the other Washington, doing my master's and PhD and working at the World Bank as well. But just coming here has been amazing. Part of what we do here is, this is a consulate that has to give services and protection services to the Mexican community. A Mexican community in Washington State is around 790,000 strong. That's a Mexican heritage community. So that's everything from people who just arrived, people who have been here for a few generations, but they still have a link to Mexico, and they're part of the Mexican heritage community. That's 11% of the population. We also cover Alaska. Alaska it really depends when you ask. If you ask me in the summer, they have 40,000 Mexicans. If you ask me in the winter, it's 20,000. Right? But we also do, and we cover 7 counties in Idaho as well. Mexico has 50 consulates in the United States. It's the biggest consular network in the world. And we provide a lot of services that other consulates of other countries might not. So I'll be happy to talk about that as well if there are any questions on that. But I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to be addressing you. If I can ask, maybe when we hit the 30-minute mark, somebody can let me know. Otherwise, I'll just keep on talking. Thanks. And we'll start with, also want to thank Daniela Higuera, if you could say hi, Higuera. Daniela, she's my chief of staff at the consulate, so thank you for coming. And what I'm going to do is start by giving some information. And then I'm going to try to explain a little bit of how Mexico considers North America. What do we see North America as? And then maybe we can open up and just have more of a conversation, because I think that's more important to try to answer questions that you might have. So first of all, who is Mexico? What is Mexico? Mexico is the 14th largest country in the world. So in terms of space, you would have to add Germany, Spain, France, and Sweden together to cover the Mexican territory. From Tijuana to Cancun, it's the 2 farthest points in Mexico. It's about the same distance that from Seattle to Jackson, Mississippi. The border, I'm sure you're going to have questions about that one. So, from the border, it's basically the same distance than going from Seattle to Houston, Texas. Now, we have the 13th longest coastline in the world. So if you add up the coastline of Mexico, it's basically the same as all the coastline of Latin America in the Pacific. We have a large domestic market. So our median income is $7,880. According to a forecast, income will grow about 16.6% from 2014 to 2018. So we have a solid macroeconomic environment. Mexico has not been growing at the 5 or 6% of other countries, but we have maintained our economic growth of 2% to 3% for the past 10, 12 years. And this is very important because for the first time in history, while the United States was going through an economic crisis, Mexico didn't stop growing. Our economy kept on growing, even though the United States was going into crisis. And that has to do with a change in production in Mexico. We have passed from a basic oil-producing country and agricultural producing country to a manufacturing country. Most importantly also, we do a lot of business, not only, of course, with the US, our primary partner, but we also do a lot of business with other countries in the world, and we have an increasing internal market. So that's also very important. There are different groups of countries, so we've been grouped by different, in a different way, and we hear a lot about the BRICS. Everybody has heard about what the BRICS are: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Those are, at some point, somebody in Goldman Sachs decided that those were the countries that were pushing forward. And the reality is that when you compare Mexico to those economies, actually Mexico has a more solid macroeconomic system. We have been put it together with another group, so it's MICTA: Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, Australia, and Korea. And we actually have become a pretty good group because it's a pretty good group of countries to be with, actually. So we work together in quite a few things with MICTA. So we're a sophisticated economy, export of medium and high manufacturers. Mexico, the third one with 16.7% of GDP. Global leadership, aerospace, something that's important for this area. So Mexico is the sixth supplier of airplane parts to the American aerospace industry. We're also the biggest buyer of commercial airplanes in Latin America. Automotive and auto parts. We're the eighth producer and fourth exporter globally of new light vehicles in the world. And we can talk about the car manufacturing because I think that's quite an interesting part of it. But we're also, for instance, most probably, each one of you, when you turn on your TV this morning, if it was a flat panel TV, most probably it was made in Mexico. So we're also a big player in IT. So again, this is an economy that's growing. We still have a lot of developing to do. We are a developing country in many ways, still dealing with a big issue regarding poverty, that we have a big chunk of our population to bring out of poverty. But this is how we're getting there. So we're the first exporter of mangoes in the world. Of course, the first producer of avocados in the world. Tomatoes, limes, fourth of strawberries, and very importantly, the first exporter of beer in the world. Which, Washington State is the biggest producer of hop in the world, right? So it's a pretty good match. Now, what have we been doing? We've been doing quite a few of reforms in Mexico to allow for this to happen. So, of course, the creation of NAFTA, and this is important. I'm going to get into this right now, but our central bank is completely independent from the government. Also, our National Electoral Board is completely independent from the executive. And that's a big change that happened that allowed for the democratic transition in the year 2000. And in 1994, where we had probably what we, at least in my generation, we consider the first truly democratic election, a presidential election in Mexico for a long time. And that was done by creating a system that doesn't report to the executive power in terms of elections. Labor reform, telecommunications reform, and all of this that you see here were very important in allowing for the economy and the democratic system to be established. I'm going to go fast on these ones. Of course, energy reform, and I can get into this with, of course. Now, what are the challenges that we face as an economy? We have decreasing government income. Why? Because while our economy is no longer dependent on the sale of oil, our government budget still is dependent on oil. So when international oil prices go down, the government's budget decreases. And that's one of the situations we have right now. We are working under reduced budgets. We are in the midst of a judicial system reform that has to be implemented. That's one of the biggest challenges that we face. The local government professionalization. We have a system just like in the US in which it's supposed to be that local governments take care of as many things as they can so that decisions are closer to the people. But our local governments are very small and don't have the resources or the capabilities many times to do so. We are a federal system just like the United States with 32 states. A new state, Mexico City, whoever went to the DF, good for you because you cannot go to the DF anymore. There's no DF anymore. Mexico City just became a new state, a new entity, with a new constitution that we have to see if it passes. It's being challenged. There was a constitutive body that just finished a new constitution. It's being challenged in court. We're going to see how that plays out. It's actually quite interesting. And of course, we have to keep enhancing the productivity of our system. But one of the things that's very important to say, we are a country that's committed to free trade. And this is important to understand. Mexico comes from the world of import substitution. If you don't know what this means, I can tell you, when I was a kid in Mexico City, you couldn't buy things that were produced outside. If you came to the US, you bought a lot of things that, for instance, cereal, because we didn't get the US cereal in Mexico. Why? Because our system was made to protect national production. Sounds familiar? What happened? It allowed us at the beginning to grow, but we were not fast enough in opening our borders to products. And therefore, our local industry started making products that were not as good as international products were, and that they were expensive, and they were not competitive because there was no competition in the market. So there was no incentive to companies to be more efficient and for companies to provide better price to the public. And at that point, Mexico decided to change and open itself to the world. And we did two things. One is we joined the GAC system, which lowers tariffs, and then we decided to join NAFTA. Now this is very interesting because I was reading the other day a book that was co-written, a really good book. It was co-written by Jorge Castañeda, who's a Mexican author, and he used to be foreign minister, and Robert Pastor. Robert Pastor was a US academic. He was at American University, and he's probably known as the father of North Americanism. If you haven't read Pastor's work, I really suggest you do. It's really, really astonishing. And Pastor wrote in this book, and he was promoting a free trade agreement. And he said, even though the US is asking and keeps asking Mexico, I'm paraphrasing, but to join in a free trade agreement, the more than the US asks, the more than Mexico is going to say no. This was in the 80s. It's interesting how we see how things might change. Why was that? Because Mexico, again, was in a situation that we wanted to protect our industry because we thought we couldn't compete. At that point, a decision was made. If we want to create better opportunities for our people in Mexico, we need to compete. And we need to get access to bigger markets. And in that sense, we decided to join NAFTA. It was a big cost for Mexico doing so. We lost a lot of our industry because we were not ready to compete with the US industry in many areas. But bit by bit, the Mexican companies started understanding how this system worked, and they started coming about, and the economy switched around and started growing. We still have a lot of challenges. For instance, we still have a very big gap in incomes, something that the US is starting to see as well. This is a big thing that I was the head negotiator for the UN development goals. And one of the biggest things that we brought to the table is reducing income gap. And it was funny because it was exactly the developed countries that didn't want to address that because it's very complicated. But it's one of the things that we jointly are challenged by. So we have 45 we have FTAs, free trade agreements with 45 countries. Brazil has 8, China has 19, the United States has 20, Colombia has 42, so we have 45. And of course, we were going to be part of the TPP. We had already accepted it. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Probably the TPP will go ahead without the United States, and it might include China or not. We're going to have to see how that goes. Our logic in free trade is that we are part of NAFTA. To the south, we are part of the Pacific Alliance. Anybody has heard about the Pacific Alliance? Well, this is a very interesting group. Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico. These are countries that share a lot in terms of our view of where we want our countries to be, our economies to be, our democratic systems to strengthen. But we decided to make an economic agreement between ourselves that it's not a political one, it's only an economic one. But the four countries together represent the biggest chunk of the Latin American economy. So it's bigger than Mercosur, it's bigger than other agreements, and we're working together with those countries. Of course, the TPP, again, we have to see what happens. And we have a free trade agreement with the European Union, which we're revising to make it stronger and should be finished by this year. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go into NAFTA too much unless there are questions there. But why is NAFTA important? Because if we look at the market that it's created by Mexico, the US, and Canada, you know, it's comparable to the market of putting together Germany, Japan, and China. This is a huge market, which creates a lot of opportunities, both for Mexican companies, but also for US companies. This is just about the intra-regional trade that we see. But what's very interesting, and I want to see if I have that I'll leave it here, but it's that what has happened with NAFTA, it has evolved from being a free trade agreement to being a joint manufacturing system. So you've heard a lot about how Mexico exports a lot of cars, and it's true. What it's not been really said is that really 40% of the parts that go into a Mexican-made car are actually made either in the US or Canada. That a car made in Mexico comes in and out of the US-Mexico border 6 times during its production process. Or that a car made in the US actually has at least 40% of its parts made either in Mexico or Canada. So what has happened is that we have created joint manufactured systems. And that's what brings this area into being, and that's why we think it's so important. Now, again, we committed to NAFTA, and in the view of Mexico, in that way, we decided to overcome years of looking at the US, wanting to be close, but at arm's length. You know, there's this saying, poor old Mexico, so far away from God and so close to the United States. I don't know if you heard it. You know, there are a lot of challenges of being a neighbor to the most powerful country in the world. But we decided that, yes, there are challenges, but there are also a lot, many great things that can come about it. And in that sense, that's when Mexicans decided to become North American. In the view of Mexico, when we decided that, the rules were established, yes, by a negotiation of the 3 countries, but really established by the United States. And there was a price we had to pay to join that market. And we paid it. And we lost a lot of our industries in that process. So, but as we go forward, you know, the logic is, okay, we're playing by the rules. So don't move the goal when we're about to get to the line, right? That's a little bit of what's happening. Now, we truly believe, you know, there are 30 million Mexicans, Mexican heritage population, 30 to 35 million in the United States. It's a big chunk, right? 2 million Americans living in Mexico and growing. We have it's the biggest, the country with the most American retirees in the world is Mexico, for instance. So there are a lot of incentives, and if you go to a border town, it would be impossible to think of any border town in either side of the border without thinking about the interaction with the other side. So that's how we look at the relation with North America. as it comes to be in terms of, and by the way, this has also it has brought us together in other areas that have been surprising. I was in charge of part of the coordination of Mexico's participation in the UN Security Council. For many years, Mexico did not want to be part of the UN Security Council. I don't know if you're aware of this. The UN Security Council has 5 permanent members. Of course, the US is one of them. And then it has other members that rotate every 2 years, right? These are the elected members. So for many years, Mexico decided not to be part of, or not to put itself up for the election. Why? Because there was a view in the foreign ministry that the type of things that we saw in the Security Council were things that were very far away from Mexican interests, but very close to the US ones. And because we had a different worldview, we're going to keep on, confronting each other in the Security Council. But the surprise is that when we did an analysis of that situation, it turns out that more than 80% of the time, we vote in the same way in the United Nations. Then, of course, there's the case of Iraq, where we didn't. But we normally vote in the same way. And we found out that we're getting closer and closer in many actions. I can tell you my interactions with the United States delegation on climate change were constant. We were pushing for the same things. Of course, we wanted the US to be part of the agreement. That was very important. Otherwise, the agreement would not serve its purpose. Same thing when we were negotiating, when I was negotiating the Arms Trade Treaty. We wanted the US to be part of it because the US sells more than 60% of the weapons in the world, right? So we understand and normally can work very well together. There are challenges as well that we face. I don't know if you're aware, every year between 80 to 100,000 weapons are bought legally in the United States and sent illegally into Mexico. That's a big challenge for us. It's a big challenge that the United States has not been able to stop. Also the amount, cash that goes into Mexico. And then comes, the drugs issue. And this is very interesting because there's such a different point of view in Mexico and the United States regarding the drug situation. You see, for the US, not for everybody, but you hear a lot, is Mexico has to stop this. In the Mexican perspective, and again, I'm generalizing, but in general, it's, wait a second. We are in the middle of this. The market is up there in the north. Drugs are going to flow, and they used to flow through the Caribbean. The United States made a point of shutting down that pathway because it thought that the strength of the Mexican and Central American governments was a better way of stopping the drugs to getting to the US, while it was more difficult to do in the Caribbean. So they shut the path to the Caribbean. And what happened was the drugs started going by land through Central America and Mexico. And that created a problem for us, which we were not part of it. So the view in Mexico is, you want to stop this, we want to stop this, stop buying, right? So we have a difference of opinion. But whatever happens, we do share some problems that we can only solve together. So to the question that was posed in the beginning, do we still like you? Yes, we do. Very much. And I've been posed this question by quite a few people that's very surprising to me. The other day somebody said, I'm going to Mexico. Should I be worried? Of course you shouldn't. You're always going to be welcome. If at this point your last name starts with T, maybe you should be careful about going to a place that you have insulted continuously. Because at the end of the day, we want a strong relation. And we want a strong interaction. And I'm convinced that the relation between Mexico and the US doesn't go through Washington, D.C. or Mexico City. It's about communities, it's about societies. But the only way we're going to be able to reach any agreement to see if we have to modernize NAFTA, to see how we work together, is if we do it in a framework of respect and common dignity. And that's the bottom line. Because creating problems for this relation will create a lot of costs for Mexico, but it will also create a lot of costs for the US. We're convinced that's not the way forward. So we are trying to work as much as we can in bringing, again, the two countries together stronger and going forward together. Hopefully the US administration will have a similar view. But for that to happen, one of the most important things is to understand that we're talking about equal governments, equal people, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and all human beings, need respect. So that's where we are. Hopefully it helps, and I'm more than happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. So if you have some questions, again, we're recording them, so if you could raise your hand, and we will run to you with a microphone. Here's a question right over here. Could one of you hustle over here? I can't do it because I'm old.
Thank you. I would ask a question about maybe the border, but I'm not going to. Someone else can ask that. But I think that you're really knowledgeable about this, and I was wondering, just from my own understanding, because I haven't, really talked to a consulate before, how do you know all this, and how do you find all of this information out, and do you have to travel back and forth? I'm just curious about how you seem to know everything about all this.
Oh, no, I know just a little bit. But, our consulates, the consulates and the consuls, we report to Mexico City and to our embassy also in Washington, D.C., but directly to Mexico City. We get also our instructions on what to do in terms of what programs we're going to run. But we are representative of our countries, right? We are diplomats and we come. So it's part of our job to get as much information as we can from what's happening in our country, in the country that's hosting us, and to try to understand how to better the links, between the regions. So that's a little bit of we have a great team here and an amazing team in Mexico City and in Washington, D.C., and we work very strong every day. We provide a lot of services to the community. We have a protection department, we have a documentation department, we have a cultural promotion department, we have a political and economic affairs department, so we do a lot of the work and put it all together. Thank you. Can we get up? Thank you.
So you were talking about that they are reforming the judicial system in Mexico. How is that about? Because here you cannot really get that information, and you cannot exactly trust in Mexican television, because like Fox News, you cannot trust in Televisa. So exactly what are those changes, and how it is now going to relate with the other two branches of the government?
Okay, so it's a big reform and it's needed. And we know that we need to strengthen our judicial system. So there are a few things that are happening. First, we're moving from a paper-based system in which lawyers present their case, everything written, and then it goes into to a judge, and he reads everything and makes a decision, into more of an oral argument system, just like in the U.S. Why is that important? Because an oral system allows for cases to move much quicker than the traditional system that we have. One of the problems with the Mexican system is that we don't have enough judges to hear all the cases that are pending. The other thing is that it used to be in Mexico that your investigator was also the MP to investigates also made the accusation to the judge. Now we're separated the lawyers from the investigators. So that must also help. We've made, I think, a very good job in strengthening the Supreme Court of Mexico, which is very independent from the executive, I can tell you that. I mean, if you think the Supreme Court in the United States stops executive action, you should see the Mexican Supreme Court. But we still need a lot of work in getting the right system down to the judicial system. So it has gone through Congress, and we're still, but it takes time. It takes time, a lot of resources also, but they're going there. And you can get more information in the webpage of the Supreme Court of Mexico. They have all the information about what they're doing, and then there's a time frame also on when they're going to be, they're supposed to present results on each of the sections of the reform. So I'll be happy to send the link to you.
Other questions?
Okay.
Hi. So my question, I haven't figured out the perfect wording for it, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on in this climate where there's some really heated rhetoric and some questionable policies coming out of the Trump administration, where kind of quote unquote hard diplomacy is going to be kind of up in the air right now. What opportunities are there in terms of soft diplomacy for the Mexican government to continue forging those bonds between the two nations?
Sure. The question, it's a very good question. It's, as we are facing a complicated, correct me if I'm putting it a different way, but as we're facing a complicated encounter at the federal level, what are we doing to promote Mexican relations at different levels with the United States, right? So we're doing a lot. I'll tell you what we're doing in Seattle, for instance. One of the things that we're doing, well, in Washington State, of course. One of the things that we're doing is we're working with the Greater Seattle Trade Alliance. Every year they pick a country to visit. This year they're going to visit Mexico. Governor Inslee will be heading that visit. I'm very happy about that. Going to Guadalajara and to Mexico City. And we're trying to build strong relations. We're also going to have, and this is, we're going to have a Mexico Week in Seattle soon. And you'll get the information as soon as it's ready to be launched. But this is going to be the first Mexican festival, week-long festival that we're going to be doing in this part of the country. We're going to be bringing Mexican culture and everything, from, yes, mariachis, but also the latest Mexican DJs. We're going to be bringing, from traditional painters to the more contemporary abstract, and not only the Oaxacan school of painting, which is amazing, by the way, but other painters, young painters who come from different parts of Mexico. We want to make sure that we understand each other better. One of the things that we also want to do, each city, Seattle, it's a very liberal city, right? Mexico City is a very liberal city as well. So there are also exchanges and links that we can do. By far, Mexico City is the most liberal city in Mexico. So there are things that we can do in that sense, and we're doing it. We're working very much with the states, and actually the states are looking for us. Look, the reality is that many states depend heavily, I think somebody sent the word, because maybe it's also heavenly, but they depend heavily on their exports to Mexico. For instance, Mexico is the biggest buyer of U.S. corn in the world. Mexico is the biggest international buyer of Washington State apples. And like that, I can, go on and on and on. Texas economy really depends on what they sell to Mexico. So states have been approaching us and local producers to make sure, that we maintain a system. And as we've told them, we're more than eager to do so, but we'll have to, of course, act accordingly to what we face. But yes, soft interactions are of the most importance. And again, the links between our societies are amazing. I mean, how many people here have been in Mexico at some point in their lives? It's not a bad crowd. We have to increase that number, by the way. But it's, I'm surprised about how many people I meet in this state, and Alaska as well, that have gone to Mexico. Many of you go to the resorts, which is great. Welcome. Go there as much as you can. Also go to the cities, interact with the people there. Go to Mexico City, go to San Miguel, go to Guadalajara, go to Monterrey, go to Puebla, go to Oaxaca, Mérida. It's amazing cities. Know the different, how Mexico is a diverse country. And let's try to really understand who we are and what we are. One of the biggest problems that we had in terms of image, international image of Mexico many times, and of course, the rhetoric that has been used here doesn't help. It's about criminality in Mexico. Well, yeah, we have a problem in many places. But for instance, Mérida has a lower criminality rate than Geneva. We're a big country. There are different parts of the country with different realities. And we have to understand that. It's part of understanding what our real challenges are, which we have a lot of, just like the United States has a lot of challenges. We have a lot of challenges. But that's part of, I think if we get to know each other better, it really helps solidifying the relation between the two countries. That's a little bit of, I think, where my answer would be, and it's a very important topic. Karen, here. Sorry. And then here, afterwards, here. Thanks.
Give me an overview of the educational system in Mexico, the graduation rate from high school and college comparisons.
Why don't we take the other question? I'll answer both of those. Yes, please.
Talking about social and tourism issues, Mexico used to have a lot of income from tourism from Mexico. And now, many of the people that used to go to Mexico for vacation, included my family, we used to spend 1 or 2 months a year traveling in Mexico, driving most of the time. Now, they're afraid to do that because of the drug trade syndicates that are controlling many of these roads. So what is Mexico doing about this?
Okay, thank you. So both questions. The first one, I don't have the numbers to give you, and I'll get them for you, of course, happy to do so. But we have gone through a educational reform in Mexico, a huge one. Education in Mexico, it's still a federal thing. It's not a state-run issue. So any change is complicated. It's the biggest, the teacher union used to be the biggest union in Latin America. So every negotiation is complicated. And there was a big reform. And part of the reform was because the way things were being run were not the best for the good teachers or for the students themselves. For instance, teachers in Mexico used to be able to pass their position as teachers to their sons or daughters without them having to go through an examination to make sure that they knew how to teach. If they didn't do this, they could sell their spot in the magistrate. As you can understand, that doesn't allow for a very good system itself. And many other things. The other thing, we have a system that was created many years ago and hasn't gone through a real reform. So that reform took place 2 years ago. And just last week, the Secretariat of Education presented the new educational system for Mexico, which is based on a newer system of learning by asking, by investigation, and not by repeating and just things that you know very well in this state, because from what I've studied about this state, there's so much to learn about how that system has come along. But it has been a huge endeavor in Mexico to do this. It hasn't been easy. Finally, we're there. So now we have to start implementing it to make sure that our public school system races back to what it used to be. My grandparents went to public schools in Mexico, and that was by far the best option. My father and my mother didn't anymore. So, they went to the public university, because we still have the UNAM is probably the best university in Mexico, for instance. But but that's one of the biggest challenges we have to get to where we have to be. In terms of tourism, actually, tourism to Mexico has increased every year, year to year. We are, I think right now, don't quote me on this, but I think we're the 10th largest or 9th largest recipient of international tourists. So it actually has grown quite a lot. Again, there are parts of the country where you have to, watch out, and others which you're going to be absolutely safe. What we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot, and this is something that really, when we hear, and this again, when we talk about the drug situation and how different perspective happens, and when we have our army in the streets trying to stop the situation, and when they put their lives in the line, and we lose our troops, and then we hear leaders from outside of the country saying that we're not doing our part. That really is, questioning the merits of our soldiers, our policemen and women who are losing their lives trying to stop this. Now, it's a big problem when you have so many weapons coming in, so much money coming in. We have to stop it. There's no other way around it. We have to stop it. We have to stop it by stopping the flow of money. There's a big debate in Mexico about legalizing marijuana, for instance. We haven't. That decision has not been taken, but it's a big debate right now. So I think we have to keep on working. But the most important thing that we found is that you cannot stop it through police action. You have to stop it by creating stronger communities. And that takes time. Because as you create stronger communities and you strengthen the social fabric, for instance, one of the things that we probably, I don't know if anybody of you knows this, Mexico is one, if not the country with more children's symphonic orchestras in the world. Because those are the kind of programs that we're trying to promote so that people feel part of the community and therefore come out to defend their community, their towns, and don't get into trouble because they're doing sports, they're doing arts, they're doing, So that's part of what we've learned through the years that actually works well, but it takes a long time to do it. So we have to do everything at the same time. So police action, yes, but most importantly, social action to deal with. And very important, of course, treat addicts as people who need help and not just putting them to jail, and help them out of the problem itself. So that's part of the whole program that's going out. It's run by our Ministry of Interior, and they're doing a lot of this work. But again, it takes time to do that. I'll have a follow-up, sure. Okay, can we get a...
I appreciate your answer, and I think that one of the things you mentioned is that if there's a consumerism, there wouldn't be production. In other words, our country is the biggest consumer of drugs that come through Mexico. Is there any kind of a treaty with the United States to try to stop this?
You see, that's a great question. Thank you for it. But the problem is that all the international treaties actually talk about the trafficking of drugs, not the consumption. And that's part of what we're trying to change at the UN. I was directing that negotiation because we have to start looking at the whole picture, not only about the trafficking. So we work very closely with the US. We work very closely in making sure, and this is very important to pass along. Have you ever heard of any problem to the security of the United States? I mean, real security, terrorism, kind of those things that come from the southern border? Anybody has one case in mind? There's a reason. It doesn't happen. But it doesn't happen not just because that's the way it is. It's because we work together to make sure it doesn't happen. So when we hear other things, again, why should we keep on doing it? Right? Why should we put our people in danger? We are because we should do it because we care. We should do it because we care about the not only the North American community, but because it's the right thing to do. So we'll do it, but we have to do it with an agreement, with respect, and with the commitment of the US to also do its part. So yes, I mean, for instance, there was a moment when the Mexican army was doing very well in pushing cartels off of our southern part of the territory. But what good will it do us if those cartels go to Central America? It's not a good deal. It creates problems for them, which also creates problems for us. And at the end of the day, we're part of the same people. So we can't do that. So for instance, the Mexican president put out a 10-point letter explaining what our position was going to be while engaging with the new administration in Washington, D.C. The third or fourth point, I don't remember exactly, is that we both have to understand, the US and Mexico, that we have a co-responsibility to make sure that economic development comes to Central America. Most of the people that are crossing the Mexican territory to come to the US are not Mexicans. More Mexicans are going back to Mexico and coming to the US every year. It's actually people who are getting out of Central America because, one, they have a huge drought, and there's also security issues that leads for many people to leave. So what's the answer? Let's make sure they can have an honest life there. Let's work together in terms of developing, helping, of course, it's each country's sovereignty and with respect and working together, but let's help them out. So that's the way we think things can work. We might have a different point of view, but let's see. Let's also be clear, at this point, we don't know exactly what the new administration's policies are going to be. There's not a full cabinet yet. The down part of the cabinet's not there. So we are waiting and seeing how we're going to do. But of course, we need the right message to come from the leadership in order to be able to interact. Again, we are looking at the long view. We consider ourselves a Latin American country who's part of North America. And hopefully, you all see it that way. Because we are neighbors, but we're partners. And in that sense, is the way that we want to go forward with it. Of course, yes, we're working extra time to make sure that we increase, for instance, our commerce with other parts of the world, because we cannot be dependent only on trade with North. So we are engaging with other parts of the world as stronger and stronger. But again, we have 30 to 35 million people, Mexican heritage community in the United States. There's more than 2 million Americans living in Mexico. The amount of Mexican Americans is just increasing day by day. So we're linked. We're part of the same community.
Thank you. So I have two questions. The first one is about the, so I get a feeling that many Americans have misconceptions about U.S. and Mexicans' relation, like including immigrants and borders problems. How did this misconception affect the big picture? And the second one is about the borders problem. You mentioned that U.S. actually worked very closely with Mexican with the security problem. How does Trump's stances affect this? Thank you.
Well, actually, yeah, the rhetoric affects us badly. The misconceptions are strengthened by the wrong rhetoric. So yes, that is a problem. I think we have to send the right messages and put the right information out there. First of all, if you look at the immigrant community, and not only the Mexican immigration community in general, but let's talk about the Mexican one. That's the one I represent. If you look at the criminality rate, it's way lower than any other group. There's a reason for it. It doesn't mean that they're better or worse people. It means that they don't want to get in trouble. That's a reality. So when they're presented as something that they're not, I mean, when you go to the fields and you see the hardworking people who are there from beginning of the day to late in the afternoon, trying to to make money for their families, to have a better life, they give it all they have. These are good people. These are people that are worth it. These are people that have the courage to leave what they know, to go somewhere they don't know, to try to make a better life. Where do we have to get to? To a situation where they don't have to leave to get a better life. That's where we have to get to. And if we work together, we're going to be able to get to there faster than working separately. But these are good people, and we have to understand that. First. Second, the United States showed the world that human rights must be respected. It was the United States who went to the UN. Eleanor Roosevelt went to the UN and was the leading force behind the International Declaration of Human Rights. Well, now the United States also has to show the world that it means that respect to human rights is respect to human rights anywhere in the world. And we're watching. And we're here also to protect Mexican citizens in that sense, just like the U.S. should protect and does protect its citizens outside of the United States. And every single country in the world does it. But let's not be mistaken. Human rights and social and economic rights are something that we have to respect and we have to abide by. Because, this is an international system that in many ways was built by the U.S. And that's the grandeur of this country. That's the greatness of this country, is that when it became a superpower, it didn't do what other powers have done in the past. It actually created a system that brought some of the best ideas of the country itself to the international society. So, are we going to keep on it's sometimes for us it's very strange to hear the United States complaining about an international system that is built on the principles itself of the United States. So we have to understand better what this means. And we're going to do that bit by bit. But, this is some of the issues that we have to work, to understand. I want to give the benefit of the doubt to the new administration and saying, it's not the same when you don't know everything that goes around, that when you really get into understanding what the level of the relation is. I want to do that. We don't have any option but to work together. So that's how I think. But I think this is also an opportunity to better our understanding. You know, it's very interesting. Many times somebody was telling me, you know, one of the things is that you go to a worker in a bakery, you know, an industrial bakery in the United States. And that bakery is owned by XYZ Industries, right? Well, but that worker might not know that XYZ is owned by Bimbo, which is a Mexican bakery. And by the way, the biggest bakery in the US now, right? So many people don't know that Mexican companies and Mexicans invested in the past 5 years more than $1.6 billion in creating jobs in the United States. So are we talking about 100 jobs in a factory, or are we talking about thousands of jobs of job creation because we're in an integrated community? That's a good question. So, you know, those are kind of the things that people might not know, right? But there's more and more Mexican investment in the United States. I can tell you, our job was to go and find international investment to come to Mexico. Now our job is to find international investors to come to Mexico, but also find opportunities for Mexican investors to come here. So that's pretty good. Again, Starbucks, great Seattle-based company. And really, my hat goes to them because the kind of actions they've come about in terms of social responsibility have been amazing. Their operating arm for all of Latin America and Spain is a Mexican company, Alsea. They have 550 stores or more than that in Mexico. But Alsea is a Mexican company that operates all Starbucks in Latin America. That's the kind, you know, of joint action that we're seeing. So there's so much we don't know about each other. There's so much that it's difficult to know because, you know, if Mr. Slim, you might have heard of him, owns part of the Washington Post, well, but he comes out and when he's pushed about what the Post editorial board is going to say, he says, what? You know, I would never dream of telling the editorial board what to say. And then he said he's actually trying to sell his stocks there. But anyhow, it's but it's part of, you know, what we see. The Texas economy was one of the states that was that did better during the recession in the United States. And big part of that was because of trade with Mexico, but also because of Mexican investment in Texas. So I think there's a lot to win, but these are challenging times. And I know we have to finish up, I think. We still have some time, okay.
If there are any more questions, if you think as long as you have energy.
Oh, I think.
There was an article in the New York Times today about Mexico. There's a bill before the Mexican Congress about rolling back human rights. Can you explain a little bit about what's going on with that?
I can't. I read it this morning, but I haven't read the bill. I was not aware of it, so I'm going to try to get my hands on it and to see what it actually says and where it comes from. Yeah, I read the article this morning, but I haven't had the opportunity to look at the bill. But what I can tell you, I mean, one of the things that Mexico has done, and we have a challenge regarding human rights, no question about it. But one of the things that we do is we have an autonomous body that it's an ombudsperson, that a federal ombudsperson for human rights, and then each state has its own ombudsperson for human rights as well. They make recommendations, and one of the strongest things that just happened was that a reform happened, a constitutional reform, that allows them to present first law proposals to the Congress directly without going through the executive or having to go through a congressman or a state senator, and also to go directly to the Supreme Court if there's a case. They can represent themselves. They don't have to go to through the Solicitor General or just like any person who would ask the Supreme Court. So it is a strong system. But I need to read that to answer that.
You mentioned that there's a draw of Mexicans back to Mexico. What's causing that?
The Mexican economy. If there are job opportunities, people don't want to leave where they're from or their families. I mean, some do, but that's a different story. But you don't want to leave if you don't have to, if you can make a good living where you are. Many people come here to make some money and then go back. The other thing that we found that is quite interesting is that some people have come here, have learned entrepreneurship here, and then they go back and put their own businesses and train people there. That's, I think, one of the strongest forces that we've seen. And now you can go to small towns, in the middle of Mexico, and you go into a business and say, wait, this is a very well-established business. And a lot of those people came here, worked in business, learned how to do it, and they're going back to Mexico to do it. So before I finish, I do want to send one message. The reality is that the Mexican community here, as well as other communities, the Latino, Hispanic community in general, they're under stress because of the messaging that has been coming out, because of their fear, not because of immigration, because of their fear of racism, their fear of xenophobia. And it's real. The fear is real. I don't know if the actions are real or not. We haven't seen any major situation that worry us. I'll share that with you, because it's important to learn the realities. But it's just the fear because of the speech, of the thinking that now saying things and acting in a way that it's racist, that it's acceptable. And what I ask from you is to make sure that this doesn't become a reality. That we all raise our voices when we see something like that. That you help your neighbors understand that they're part of the community. I think that's a very important thing. It's too bad that I have to be here asking you to do that. But that's a reality. I can't say enough about the local authorities statewide, in the north, in the west, in the east, Governor Inslee, Mayor Murray, Chief of Police O'Toole in Seattle, the Chief of Police in Lake Park, here in Shoreline. I can't say enough about how their work to approach the community and make them feel secure. They've been great partners, but we need all of you to raise your voice, to stand strong for the rights of people, and to make sure people feel right where they are, and to feel safe. Whatever happens in terms of the relation, I'm pretty confident we're gonna have closer and stronger relation in the long term as we go forward. But this is important to understand. Our community is under pressure, and we can all help. So thank you again for the invitation.
And please give a round of applause. And I hope you've enjoyed this evening's program.